Wet is a game that fascinates me. And I genuinely mean that when I say it. I don't mean to say that Wet is a good game. It isn't. And if you were to ask me if it was worth $60, I would cough phlegm into your face as I laughed obnoxiously. If you asked me if Wet was worth the $14 that I paid for it, I would still shake my head and definitively say absolutely not. But Wet still fascinates me from a design standpoint because, well, I want to like the game. I really do. It's got a bunch of things that I love about video games, and yet when you press it together, it's a bumbling mess that is mildly playable but dull and ultimately unworthy of your time because it actively fails to excel at any of the facets with which it attempts to entertain you. Now, let me begin by describing Wet to you so you can understand why it fascinates me so much. Today we'll be using our traditional scoring standard of 105 points. Wet is a third-person shooter with a grindhouse aesthetic, in which the player runs around its levels using acrobatic feats such as diving, sliding, and wall running. While performing these feats, the game goes into slow motion, which gives you almost 360 degrees of movement to aim your guns. Occasionally, you have to do a scripted event sequence where you have to shoot bad guys while surfing cars or falling through the sky, and occasionally, you're given quick-time events which instantly kill you if you fail them. Okay, that's basically everything there is to know about Wet. That's the entire game. But let me dive a little deeper into these individual bits of design, starting with the aesthetic. And let's first start by talking about grindhouse cinema, for those of you who don't know. As television rose to soaring popularity in 1970s America, the film industry began to suffer, and cinemas were forced to find ways to plant people in seats in order to make a living. The result was a film movement in which motion pictures were shot with low-budget equipment and no-name actors for as little money as possible, but drew in viewers by dealing with extremely lurid, sexual, violent, or controversial subject matters. These films could be made for a few $1,000s and recoup their production costs and then some easily, and were shown in theaters in the form of double or even triple features. This popularized exploitation genres, sexploitation, blaxploitation, that kind of stuff. Well, this is what Wet seeks to emulate. And granted, the titillating nature of grindhouse cinema could lend itself incredibly well to the medium of video games. This is a game called House of the Dead Overkill, a rail shooter for the Nintendo Wii, and later ported to the PlayStation 3, that emulated the feel of grindhouse movies with a very self-aware, tongue-in-cheek nature. The game pokes fun at the slipshod nature that so many films of the time were made in, with continuity errors, plot holes, and a flippant usage of sexuality and swearing that won it a place in the Guinness Book of World Records for the most uses of the word fuck in a video game. House of the Dead Overkill is a fantastic grindhouse game. 55 out of 55 points. Wet, on the other hand, contains no element of grindhouse aesthetic outside of its main screen, the definition screen that pops up when you first start the game, and the little vignettes that appear in between level sequences which emulate old-fashioned movie theater commercials.
Right at the snack bar. Extra special good hamburgers, wonderful donuts, ice-cold, thirst-quenching drinks. It's showtime, folks. Enjoy the show.
The plot is barely there. Characters are thrown at us for singular cutscenes and given these big title cards to introduce them, but then leave and we never see them again. It's really weird and disjointed, and it makes you confused as to who you're supposed to be paying attention to and who is just a side character. And this might work if there was a lot of dialogue in the game, and it let us explore who each character was, even though they weren't that important to the main storyline, but there just isn't a whole lot of story. Cutscenes come and go at a blistering pace, but not in a way that feels exciting. It's more a 3-minute sequence will occur in which a character enters, gets angrily glared at by Ruby, and then explains to Ruby that she needs to go kill a bunch of guys in the next level. End scene. That's it. Now one could argue that this could actually play into the grindhouse aesthetic, but if one would argue that, then I would tell one to go fuck oneself, because the point of making a game with an aesthetic of a bygone day is to take that aesthetic and improve upon it, or to take that aesthetic and develop it into a standalone story. Metal Gear Solid 3 is a pastiche of a bunch of old 007 and espionage thriller throwbacks. But you know what? If you've never seen a James Bond movie in your life, you can still enjoy Metal Gear Solid 3. Deadly Premonition storyline might as well be classified as Twin Peaks fanfiction, but even that feels like the author is trying to show you something you've never seen before.
I knew I could count on it. Never fails. Now then, let's get going.
And as much as I hate to compare this game to Metal Gear, since Metal Gear does have its fair share of problems from a writing standpoint, I can remember every character I encounter in a Metal Gear game, even if they're just a minor side character. In this game, I don't even fucking know anything about the main character. And this is all heartbreaking because I want this game's story to be good. After the introductory level, we flash forward a year later to Ruby's home, which is apparently an old aircraft junkyard. And this is an interesting character trait. I'd like to know more about it. It raises some interesting questions. Why does Ruby live in an airplane junkyard? Why does Ruby kill people for money for a living? There's a mat and beer cans on the ground by the table. Does she seriously not have a bed? What did she do with that big suitcase full of money she got at the end of the last level? Where'd Ruby come from? What was her past like? Why is she angry all the time? But we don't get anything related to this through the story. It's all just Ruby walking around sneering at people. And even if it were true that the story didn't matter and merely served as a cheap way of serving the gameplay, it still sucks because the game isn't particularly violent. Ruby kills a lot of faceless, mindless goons, but no more than any other popular third-person shooter. But honestly, I shouldn't even focus so much on the story. Let's talk about the gameplay. As I said, it consists of diving around and shooting a bunch of the same enemies as they stop you from trying to reach your destination. The problem is that the gameplay is essentially the exact same thing you would encounter from any title in the Max Payne series, but done much more clumsily. Actually, no. Max Payne isn't the best title to compare it to. The best title to compare it to would be Stranglehold, a 2007 video game for the 360 and the PS3, in which you essentially did the exact same moves that you can pull off in Wet, but with greater variety, more destructibility to the environment, and most importantly, a hell of a lot more fluidity. All of Ruby's animations feel inorganic, like we're watching a pre-designed animation that isn't necessarily set up for the environment we're playing in. Regardless of what your thoughts on the actual game are, Max Payne 3 was flawless in this respect. Every dive ended with Max bracing himself against the ground or bumping into the wall, and if he crashed into something on the way, he didn't just awkwardly clip through it. In Wet, wall running is assigned to the same button as wall climbing. So if you want to climb up a wall, especially during one of the great mandatory test missions they haphazardly throw at you in the middle of the game because you just unlocked submachine guns and the game has to make sure you know what those are and how they work because you've never played a fucking video game before, then you need to position yourself perpendicular to the wall if you don't want Ruby to go into a wall run. The game suggests during loading screens that a good way to rack up points on your combo meter is by diving, shooting at people, and then holding the B button as you're in the air to go into a slide. But rather than naturally transitioning into a slide, if you try to do this, Ruby hits the ground, goes back to her normal standing animation, and then does a slide. It looks wonky and awkward and fake. One of the more obnoxious things in the game are these sequences, in which Ruby shoots a guy in the face, gets blood on her own face, and then seems to go into some kind of psychotic rage, putting on camera color effects. If this was in any other game, I'd be okay with it. It's just a little stylistic thing. But the thing that bothers me is that this isn't a grindhouse trait. This is an Eastern cinema trait that people occasionally imitate stylistically in Western cinema. But you know who did use this trait? Quentin Tarantino. He used it a few times in Kill Bill Volume 1. And he also made one of the movies in Grindhouse. Do you see where I'm getting with this? This game is not about Grindhouse in the traditional sense that we know of it. This game is about someone who saw Quentin Tarantino and Robert Rodriguez's film and said, "What if I made a video game like this?" See, a tenet of game design is that there needs to be a reason for your player to continue playing. With a third-person shooter like this, the action runs the risk of becoming monotonous unless you have something extra to go along with the running and shooting. Max Payne uses its noir storyline to draw you into its universe and make sure you care about its characters. Stranglehold continuously throws new and inventive, stylish ways to kill your enemies, right up until its final levels. Wet doesn't do anything. Occasionally it throws a set piece at you, but those are usually more obnoxious than they are fun. They often leave no room for mistakes and kill you if you happen to make one, forcing you to sit through a loading screen as you wait to restart the sequence. And I still don't understand why the game is so goddamn clunky. Why does Ruby waddle around like the penguin when she's just walking around? Why are no objects in the environment breakable? Why does everything look like it's made of plastic? Why do... Oh. Well, I suppose that explains it. So, totaling all this up, it seems the current score is roughly 23 points. But before I end this, I'm going to add another rule onto my brown poster. Any video game that features a scene in which a character is accused of murder or some other heinous crime, and features a scene where they completely have the opportunity to say, "Oh no, wait, you're mistaken, that wasn't me," but they don't for any particular reason other than if they did, the plot would stop progressing, gets points taken off. Because Jesus Christ, does that annoy me. Oh hey, that was a Bethesda game too.
Oh, look at you. You fucking bitch. You can't do it, can you?
William,
Eh?
you just accused her of killing your son. Why would she not be able to do it? Don't you think there'd be some other reason that she's not killing you other than the fact that she has a conscience? Because apparently she doesn't. She's killed several hundred people to get to this, but this game doesn't make any fucking sense. What am I doing? You know what? I changed my mind. Wet doesn't fascinate me. It annoys me, and I am annoyed by its existence. Also, I took down my brown poster. It was badly designed. I'm going to class now, and I'm gonna see if I can find another one. I just went to my class, and I couldn't find a big piece of paper there. And I'm getting really nervous now because I don't think I can keep doing these videos if I don't have a big piece of paper on my wall. Fucking... Okay, new rule. The way this works is, instead of having one piece of paper, every time I complete a review, I'm going to add another piece of paper to our suite room wall. And I don't give a shit if any of these other people in this dorm don't want to do that, because that's what we're going to do.